There is a tractor sitting in a field in Saskatchewan right now, painted John Deere green, that John Deere spent millions of dollars trying to make sure you would never own. Only 51 of them were ever built. And the contract that created them, the contract that killed the company that built them, was reportedly signed in the dead of winter, around the turn of a new year, in what one collector has called the most one-sided deal in the history of American farming. This is the story of 7 brothers, one impossible machine, and the green-painted trap that erased them from history. And by the end, you're going to understand why. When farmers look at a John Deere logo on certain tractors, they don't see a winner, they see a crime scene. Let's go back, Portland, Oregon, the 1920s. Long before any of this, there were the Wagner brothers, 7 of them, and these were not soft men. For decades, they built machines for logging and mining, brutal, mountain-crushing work, where if your equipment fails, somebody doesn't go home. And here's the first thing you need to understand, because it changes everything. The Wagners were not tractor people. They were terrain people. And that tiny difference is exactly why they were about to humiliate the biggest names in the entire industry. Because in 1949, one of the brothers, Elmer, came home from the war. He'd been overseas in Europe, and while he was there, he saw a machine. We don't have a perfect record of what it was, but it planted a seed, a dangerous, expensive, beautiful idea. What if a tractor didn't have to fight the hill? What if it could bend into it? See, every tractor on Earth at that point had the same fatal weakness. Put it on a steep, uneven slope, and one wheel lifts off the ground. And the moment a wheel lifts, you lose traction, you lose power, you lose the fight. On the savage hills around Portland, regular tractors were useless. So Elmer sketched something nobody had successfully mass-produced before. A tractor that hinged in the middle, 2 halves joined by a pivot so the front could twist completely independently from the back. No matter how rough the ground got, all 4 wheels stayed planted. All 4 wheels kept pulling. Today we call that an articulated 4-wheel drive tractor, and it's worth billions. Every monster tractor you've ever seen tearing across a wheat field in Kansas or Alberta is a descendant of what Elmer Wagner sketched in a workshop in 1949. But back then, it was just a crazy idea from a logging family nobody in the farm world took seriously. That was about to be a very expensive mistake, just not for the Wagners. In 1954, all 7 brothers teamed up with a businessman named J. Burke Long and made it official. Wagner Tractor Incorporated. And then they did the thing every big company swore couldn't be done. They built it. The first models, the TR6, the TR9, the TR14, were beasts, putting out real horsepower in an era when most farm tractors managed a fraction of that. But here's the part the engineers said was impossible. When you hinge a tractor in the middle, how do you send engine power across a joint that's constantly bending and twisting? Most attempts either lost a ton of power or tore themselves apart. The Wagner's answer was a patented coupling they called the Pow-R-Flex, and it was genius. It let the 2 halves twist and turn fully while still delivering nearly all the engine's power to all 4 tires, on terrain that left every competitor spinning helplessly in the dirt. And word spread fast. Out in Big Sky country, Montana, the Dakotas, and up into the wheat country of Canada, farmers watched these things do the impossible. By the late 1950s, one of the very first Wagner dealers reportedly moved over 350 tractors in just a few years. And these weren't cheap. A Wagner could run $15,000 when that was the price of a house. Farmers lined up anyway. By 1960, this little family company the big boys had laughed at was pulling in over $3 million a year. And that is the exact moment the sharks smelled blood. Because one company was watching all of this very, very closely. A company with a green and yellow logo you'd recognize anywhere on Earth. And they were not happy. You have to understand what John Deere was in the 1950s. A giant, an institution, not just a brand, practically a religion in rural America. And here was this tiny Oregon outfit building a kind of tractor Deere didn't have, couldn't build, hadn't even figured out yet. So Deere did what giants do. They decided to take a look for themselves. In 1956, John Deere set up a head-to-head test. And picture this, because it is cinema, a hilly field. The leadership of John Deere standing at the edge of it, including, reportedly, the president of the entire company, William Hewitt himself. The most powerful men in American agriculture, arms crossed, watching. In the field, two tractors, a modified case, respected, established, against a Wagner TR9, the upstart, both hitched to the same 24-foot chisel plow. Heavy, brutal, a real test of pulling power, and they let them loose at the same time. On the flat ground, pretty even. Both did fine, and you can imagine the Deere executives starting to relax. And then the Wagner driver did something. He turned the nose of his tractor straight up the steepest hill in the field, and he climbed it, plow and all, dragged 24 feet of steel right over the top like it was a driveway. The most powerful men at John Deere watched a logging family from Oregon do something their own engineering couldn't. And then came the part that would have haunted me. The case tried to follow. It got partway up, lost traction, and slid back down the hill, right there, in front of everybody. The future of farming embarrassed the past on a hillside in 1956. Now, most companies, after a humiliation like that, would go home and engineer something better, and Deere did try. But what they tried became one of the most fascinating disasters in tractor history. In 1959, John Deere unveiled their answer. The John Deere 8010, a monster, the biggest tractor Deere had ever built, articulated, four-wheel drive, towering over everything. And here's a detail that's almost too perfect. The 8010 looked remarkably similar to a Wagner. Deere had watched Wagner climb that hill. The student was copying the master. There was just one problem. The 8010 didn't work. It was enormous and expensive, around $30,000, a fortune in 1959, and plagued with problems, especially the transmission. Deere built a Giant, and the Giant kept stumbling. They reworked it into the 8020, tried again, and it still struggled. By the time the dust settled, the entire 8010 and 8020 run added up to barely 100 tractors over several years. Let that sink in. The most powerful name in farming tried to build what the Wagner brothers built in a workshop, and they couldn't pull it off. Not reliably. Not yet. And now Deere had a gaping hole at the top of their lineup, and every season it stayed empty. The competition got stronger. Meanwhile, Wagner was getting bigger. In 1961, FWD Corporation out of Clintonville, Wisconsin, bought a majority stake, and Wagner became FWD Wagner. With deeper pockets, the lineup exploded. From the WA4 up to the colossal WA24, with power running up to 300 horsepower. So picture the board now. Deere, a wounded giant with a failed flagship. Wagner, the actual inventor of this entire category, backed by serious money, building the best big tractors in the world. If you're John Deere, what do? Out-engineer them? Or make them a deal they can't refuse? December 1968. Here's where it turns from a business rivalry into something that feels almost like a heist. By the late 60s, Deere needed a big tractor now. Their own in-house design wasn't ready. And every year without a flagship four-wheel drive was a year they were getting beaten. So Deere went to Wagner with an offer. We'll buy your tractors, the WA14 and WA17. We'll paint them green, put our name on them, and sell them through the biggest dealer network in farming. On the surface, it sounded incredible. The inventor of the articulated tractor, getting the legendary Deere badge slapped on their work. As the legend goes, the deal came together right around the turn of the year, a handshake in the cold, reportedly tied to a New Year's celebration. The midnight contract. But here's the thing about deals that sound too good to be true. You have to read the fine print. And buried in that contract were two clauses that, put together, form one of the most ruthless pieces of corporate strategy you will ever hear about. Clause 1. While the deal was active, FWD Wagner could not sell the WA14 or WA17 under their own name. Deere had exclusive rights. Wagner's own dealers, the people who'd built that company from nothing, suddenly had no Wagner tractor to sell. The machine they'd championed for over a decade now wore a green coat and a different name. And then Clause 2, the one that turns this into a trap. According to collectors and historians who've studied the deal, Deere reportedly had the right to terminate at will, whenever they wanted, no matter how many tractors they had or hadn't bought. And if they did, Wagner was contractually forbidden from building or selling another articulated four-wheel drive tractor for 5 years. Think about that. Deere controls whether Wagner can sell its own invention, can end the deal anytime, and the second it does, Wagner is locked out of the business it invented for 5 entire years. One collector called it possibly the most one-sided contract in history. And it's hard to argue. So the question screaming in your head is, why on earth would Wagner sign that? And the truth is, we don't fully know. The exact reasoning has never been explained, which is part of why this story still haunts collectors. Maybe Wagner believed the green badge would mean a flood of orders. Maybe an old patent dispute was quietly being settled. Maybe leadership could already see that their designs were aging and figured a payday from Deere was the best way out. But there's a darker reading, the one the people who love these tractors keep coming back to. What if the point was never to sell tractors at all? What if the point was to make Wagner disappear? So the deal is signed. The tractors start coming off the line in John Deere green and yellow, and here's the number that tells you everything. Across the entire deal, Deere took delivery of only around 51 of these tractors. Some counts put it near 60. For context, the successful articulated companies that came later would build tens of thousands. These green Wagners, barely more than 50 ever existed. And the sales did not go well. The 1969 model year was a disappointment. Old designs at premium prices, in a market getting more competitive by the month. The flood of orders never came. But while those green Wagners struggled on dealer lots, something was happening behind closed doors at John Deere. Remember, Deere always said the deal was a stopgap, a bridge to fill the hole while they finished their own design. And by 1970, that design was almost ready. The 7020, an in-house John Deere four-wheel drive, built right, built reliable, built to win. So now Deere had everything it wanted. Their own tractor ready to launch, a competitor whose dealers had already been cut off, and a contract that let them flip a switch and end the whole thing whenever they pleased. You can probably guess what they did next. 1970, John Deere terminated the agreement, and right on cue, that same year, Deere rolled out the 7020, the one that actually worked. The one they'd been quietly finishing the entire time. But terminating the deal wasn't the end for Wagner. It was the execution. Because the second Deere walked away, that second clause snapped shut like a bear trap. Wagner, the company that invented the articulated four-wheel drive tractor, was now legally forbidden from building or selling one. For 5 years. The money from Deere wasn't enough to survive a 5-year exile from its own industry, and by the time it was up, the market would have moved on. There was no coming back. So Fish W.D. Wagner shut down its agricultural tractor division, the brothers' creation, the machine that climbed the hill in front of William Hewitt, the invention that started an entire category of farming, gone. And here's the part that should make the hair on your arms stand up. Deere couldn't build a reliable big tractor on their own. The 80-10 and 80-20 proved that. So they made a deal that handed them Wagner's tractors to sell and simultaneously locked Wagner out of competing. A bridge to cross while they finished the 70-20. And when they reached the other side, they burned the bridge with their rival still on it. Whether that was the plan all along or just a deal that happened to be catastrophic for one side, the result isn't up for debate. John Deere got a working flagship and a market with one fewer competitor. The family from Oregon who started it all got 5 years of silence and a closed factory. If the story ended there, it'd be a tragedy. But it doesn't, because what the Wagner brothers built was too good to die. When the deal collapsed, Wagner's dealers were left stranded. Some closed their doors, but a few looked at those orphaned Wagner tractors still out in the fields and thought, if nobody else will build these, why don't we? A couple built their own articulated tractors from scratch. 2 brands were born directly out of those stranded dealerships. One was called Wright. The other became one of the most famous names in the history of agriculture, Big Bud. If you know tractors, you just sat up in your chair. Big Bud went on to build some of the largest farm tractors the world has ever seen. Giants so enormous they became roadside attractions, and it traces straight back to the Wagner story. The very deal meant to bury the articulated tractor in Oregon ended up scattering its seeds across the American West. And here's the bigger picture. Today, every monster articulated four-wheel drive tractor on Earth is a direct descendant of what Elmer Wagner sketched in 1949. Deere, Case, Steiger, New Holland, Versatile, all of them. The category Wagner invented didn't just survive, it took over the world. The brothers lost the company, but they won the future. You can erase a company from a market. You cannot erase an idea from history. So let's come back to where we started. That tractor in the field, painted John Deere green, one of barely 50 ever made, still working decades later on a farm in Canada, outliving the deal, the company, and almost everyone who was in the room when that contract was signed. When a collector spots one today, they're not just looking at a rare tractor, They're looking at the last surviving evidence of one of the quietest, most ruthless moves in American industrial history. Maybe Deere set a trap, maybe Wagner gambled and lost, maybe it was just business, cold, legal, and devastating. But here's what I keep coming back to. The Wagners built something the biggest company in the industry couldn't. They climbed the hill the giants slid back down. And even after they were locked out and erased, their invention refused to die. It got bigger, it got everywhere. It quietly won. So the next time you see a giant tractor folding into a turn out in a wheat field somewhere, look closely at how it bends in the middle. That's not John Deere's idea. That's a ghost from Oregon, still pulling, still winning, 50 years later. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who appreciates the stories the history books leave out. The real ones, with the fine print and the betrayals and the machines that refuse to quit. I've got a whole list of these, so stick around. Because trust me, this is not the only company that got buried by a midnight contract.